Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to unpack some surprising insights from a whole stack of sources. Today, we're taking a really deep dive into something we, often just brush off first world problems.
Hmm.
We joke about them, sure, maybe roll our eyes. But what if they're not just trivial complaints? What if they're actually signals of something much deeper going on?
That's exactly the idea. Our mission today is to explore this whole concept of complaining, especially when it happens publicly, like on social media. We want to look at how it's seen, what it really tells us about the person, about society, and the dynamics behind it all. This deep dive, it's about going beyond those instant judgments. We want to uncover the nuances, the sort of hidden truths in the material we've looked at.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. So, what is complaining really at its core? Based on our research, it's a way of expressing that you see something as wrong. And like you said, that there's often this subtext, this feeling that someone else should probably fix it. It's a bit different from just venting, right? Venting might just be looking for empathy. Complaining seems to want more like acknowledgement or actual change or just validating that, yeah, this is unfair.
Right. And when people decide to complain publicly, there are a few key reasons why they might do that. Sometimes it's genuinely about exposing something bad, like a terrible landlord or a really exploitative job or maybe some shady company practice. It's a signal of injustice. Other times it's more about finding connection, a call for solidarity maybe, hoping others will jump in with, oh yeah, I've been through that too. It builds this kind of community. And then there's just the relief, isn't there? Getting it out there, especially if you feel like nobody's listening in your private life, it's emotional offloading. Plus, for some people, it's almost like a brand of honesty. They see it as being authentic, pushing back against all that super polished kind of fake positivity you see online.
So that's interesting. And how strangers interpret these public complaints? Wow, it seems to vary wildly. It really depends on like the tone, the context, maybe how often the person complains. You get this sympathetic side, right? People thinking, wow, that's brave, or I totally get that, I feel seen, or maybe, yeah, they're highlighting a real problem here.
Exactly. But then there's the other side.
The negative take, like, they're just whining, or they're looking for attention, or even they sound so ungrateful, maybe playing the victim. And sometimes it gets really intense, like people saying this is just trauma dumping,
Yeah.
sharing way too much heavy stuff inappropriately.
Yeah.
It sounds like a real tightrope walk. Complain too much, you're seen as exhausting. Too little, maybe you seem fake, or like you're okay with the bad stuff.
Definitely. And if we dig into what complaining publicly says about the person doing it, well, it can signal a few things. Sometimes it might reflect a feeling of powerlessness, like they feel they don't have any other way to get hurt or make change, no private channels.
Hmm.
For others, maybe it's about confused boundaries. Using social media almost like a public diary, maybe not fully realizing or maybe not caring that it invites judgment.
Right, like they forget everyone can see it.
Yeah. Or maybe it is a performance of suffering. Complaining becomes part of their identity.
Yeah.
The underdog or the misunderstood genius or maybe the burnt out empath. And there's also this idea of control. Complaining first lets you frame the story your way. It's almost like preemptive PR.
Interesting. And there are bigger forces at play too, right? Cultural things, psychological factors like Western individualism. We're often told speak up, be empowered, but maybe only in certain ways, like in nicely packaged little doses.
Exactly. And then you've got what some call capitalist productivity culture.
Hmm.
It tends to see complaining as, well, weakness. Unless, of course, it's framed as solutions-oriented, very efficient.
And we absolutely have to talk about gender and race here. Our sources point out that complaints from people in marginalized groups are, unfortunately, much more likely to be shut down, dismissed as just being angry or entitled or somehow ungrateful.
That's a critical point. And add to that parasocial dynamics, those weird one-sided relationships we feel with online figures. Strangers feel like they know the person complaining, so they feel overly invested or sometimes really overly judgmental.
Which brings us right to that snap judgment you mentioned earlier.
Yes, exactly. When we see someone complaining, especially if it's loud or messy, real rage or dripping sarcasm or a full-on meltdown, we tend to label them instantly. We might think, oh, they're emotionally immature or just seeking attention or, wow, can't handle their life privately, maybe no boundaries, so unprofessional.
It's almost automatic.
It is. And it's not always fair, obviously, but it's shaped by these cultural ideas about keeping it together, right? Especially in many Western contexts, there's this unspoken rule. Keep your head down, manage your emotions, don't air your dirty laundry in public. So when someone does break that mold, when they show that raw grievance, it feels like a violation of sorts. And that triggers discomfort, maybe disdain, or just a quick dismissal.
What's really wild is how complaining itself has sort of turned into entertainment online. It's almost a genre. Think about those story time videos or the dramatic My Horrible Boss sagas or, those viral Karen videos.
Oh, absolutely.
That kind of public complaining, it gets reframed, doesn't it? It becomes storytelling. Sometimes people even make money off it. The problem itself is suddenly like currency.
A kind of currency, yeah. And this leads us to a really fascinating, maybe slightly disturbing idea. Emotional dysregulation as entertainment.
Yeah.
And as algorithm bait. The core idea is pretty stark. The very things that might make someone seem, let's say, unhinged or just exhausting in real life, those exact traits are often rewarded by online algorithms.
How so?
Well, think about it. A calm, reasoned post maybe gets you nods, but a meltdown, all caps, angry emojis, accusations, maybe even tears on camera, that stuff often goes viral.
Conflict plus emotion.
Equals engagement bait.
Exactly.
So what tends to happen is the internet naturally selects for the loudest, the messiest, the most dramatic forms of complaint. This creates a really skewed picture for all of us. We see these extreme examples constantly, and it shapes how we think about complaining in general.
So we end up with this false link like, oh, people who complain are just unstable.
Precisely. When the reality might be more like only the complaints that look unstable or are super dramatic actually get amplified and seen by everyone.
And that feeds back into itself, doesn't it? Creates a loop like social conditioning. These really intense complaints get boosted, so we start associating all complaining with being volatile or out of control.
Right. And then people learn, maybe subconsciously, that to actually get heard above the noise, you have to escalate. You have to be more dramatic.
So the bar keeps getting higher for what feels serious enough, which leads to even more performative, maybe exaggerated complaints.
Exactly. And the paradox is this whole cycle actually increases the stigma against complaining in general, even while the algorithms are hungry for the drama.
So we get these mixed messages, huh? Like privately, we're told, use your words, express yourself, be vulnerable.
Yeah.
But publicly, the lesson seems to be only a big spectacle actually cuts through.
Which brings us to how we judge complainers and how much of that might actually be about us. Is this idea of moral judgment and psychological projection. When we react really harshly to someone complaining, it's often not just about what they said. It might be tapping into our own stuff.
Like what?
Well, maybe our own repressed feelings,
Mm.
like wishing we could speak up like that but being too afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be envy. Maybe they're getting attention or validation we want.
Hmm.
Or maybe it's a fear of being associated with them. I don't want people thinking I'm like that. Or even just secondhand embarrassment, that cringy feeling when someone's being really raw in public.
So their complaining kind of challenges the mask we wear.
Exactly. It challenges that carefully crafted social mask, that composure that many of us work really hard to maintain. And that can feel threatening or uncomfortable.
This ties right into that idea. I think you called it the suffering Olympics, where we seem to rank pain, maybe without even realizing it.
Yes, the suffering Olympics. It's that instant comparison game. You know the examples. Oh, a rich celebrity is talking about depression. Please try working minimum wage.
Right. Or a middle-class teenager feels anxious. Don't they know people are literally dying in Gaza?
Or the stay-at-home parent feeling overwhelmed is told, you're so lucky you get to stay home. Others would kill for that chance.
Yeah. It turns suffering into this weird competition. Like, only the most extreme pain or pain from the most oppressed groups is considered valid enough to even talk about.
And the irony is this doesn't actually help the people who are suffering the most. It just ends up silencing almost everyone else.
It creates this really distorted emotional world, doesn't it? Where only certain kinds of pain get airtime.
Absolutely. And this leads to what our sources describe as two invisible cages.
Okay, what are those?
The first cage is, my life is too good to complain. The second is, my pain isn't bad enough to matter.
Ah, I see. So the first one is about privilege.
Exactly. People who have visible advantages, maybe wealth, fame, stability, whatever, they often feel this intense guilt of privilege. They feel ashamed to complain about anything less than a catastrophe. They're afraid of seeming ungrateful, or they anticipate the backlash, so they kind of preemptively defend themselves or just shut down.
So they end up suppressing how they really feel, or doing these weird narrative gymnastics to explain it away.
Yeah, or they might use irony or detachment. And instead of getting compassion, they often feel like they're facing a kind of moral audit. Are you allowed to feel bad about this?
And the second cage. My pain isn't bad enough.
That's for people whose suffering might be considered more modest, or maybe it's invisible. They experience this kind of micro-shame. It's that quiet internal voice saying, if I'm not in an actual crisis, I should just keep quiet.
Because they compare themselves?
Right. They compare themselves to friends going through major trauma, or to huge global tragedies, or just anyone they perceive as having it worse.
Hmm.
So they minimize their own struggles. They don't ask for support. They might wait until things get really, really bad before they finally say something.
So why do we do this? Why this hierarchy? What are the psychological, the cultural reasons?
Well, one factor seems to be empathy fatigue. We're just so bombarded with suffering through media, right? So we subconsciously start triaging whose pain deserves our limited emotional energy.
Okay, that makes sense. Overload.
Yeah. Then there's this idea of a meritocratic morality. It's this belief, often unconscious, that suffering has to be somehow earned, or that having privilege automatically cancels out any right to feel pain.
And the online world plays a role too.
Definitely. The whole relatability economy online rewards content that feels universal. So anything too nuanced, too specific to a certain context, especially a privileged one, can feel out of touch or unrelatable and gets less traction.
Plus, maybe survivor's guilt, feeling bad for doing okay when others aren't.
That's definitely part of it, too. Feeling uncomfortable acknowledging your own relative comfort or smaller struggles when you know others are facing much bigger things.
And the trap here, as you mentioned, is that the self-silencing spreads.
It becomes contagious, yeah. People with privilege silence themselves, so we lose sight of their full humanity, their struggles. People with smaller pains stay silent, and we lose the richness of the full emotional spectrum.
So all we end up seeing is the extremes, like major trauma on one end and maybe fake performative resilience on the other.
Pretty much. And that really distorts what society sees as normal or valid feelings to share. It dulls our collective empathy and probably makes us all more cynical.
Okay, to help us visualize this, you mentioned an implicit problem hierarchy, like a caste system for problems.
Exactly. It's this imaginary ranking. At the very top, you've got what are often called third world problems: war, starvation, epidemics, lack of basic water or shelter. These are seen as the undeniably real life or death issues. Okay. Then maybe second world problems. It's a fuzzier category, often linked to developing or post-industrial nations, things like systemic corruption, hyperinflation, frequent power outages, really dangerous working conditions. These often get ignored unless there's a huge crisis that trends online.
Got it. And below that?
First world problems. This is where things like burnout, loneliness, microaggressions, the frustrations of dating apps fall. These are the ones that are often joked about, maybe acknowledged with a shrug, but not consistently treated as sources of genuine suffering.
And you even mentioned zero world problems.
Yeah, that's kind of the bottom tier, often viewed with the most hostility. Think celebrity image management crises, a billionaire complaining about yacht maintenance, maybe existential dread felt from inside extreme luxury. They're still human problems, arguably, just maybe the least relatable or sympathetic to most people.
Wow. So this whole hierarchy, this ranking,
Right.
it creates this loop, right? An emotional distortion on a massive scale.
Exactly. Think about the cycle. We see extreme suffering, daily news, social media, viral videos. We instinctively compare our own pain to it, often feel guilty if our problems seem small.
So we silence ourselves out of shame, fear of looking spoiled.
Right. Then we turn around and judge others when they complain, especially if they seem privileged. How dare they?
Meanwhile, the internet keeps amplifying the most extreme stories, which kind of numbs us further and reinforces the ranking.
Yeah. And even real problems start to feel performative. So we either overshare dramatically to get noticed, or we undershare out of guilt. We scroll past each other's pain, feeling confused about what we're even allowed to feel anymore.
It's overwhelming. Like you said, we weren't built to process the entire world's pain before breakfast.
We really weren't.
So, okay, after breaking down this whole hierarchy, this comparison game, what's the core takeaway? What should we remember about our own pain, regardless of where it falls on that imaginary ladder?
The fundamental insight really is this. Your pain isn't invalid just because it's not the absolute worst pain imaginable. Full stop. What we need is something like a pluralistic emotional ethic, a world where, say, a burnt-out 30-year-old in Toronto can feel overwhelmed and cry about it without having to compare herself to a refugee halfway across the world.
Where a grieving millionaire can actually express heartbreak without their PR team having a meltdown.
Exactly. Where a teenager feeling crushed by social media anxiety doesn't have to apologize for feeling that way. Suffering isn't a contest. Pain doesn't need permission to be real.
Okay, so pulling this all together, first world problems, We dismiss them, joke about them, but what our deep dive is showing is that they're not just shallow. They're reflecting some very real things happening psychologically, culturally, even existentially.
Precisely. What looks like a petty complaint, the Wi-Fi is slow, the avocado isn't ripe, it's often just the surface layer. It's frequently a proxy for something much deeper, much more human, hiding underneath.
Can you give some examples of that?
Sure, like constantly complaining, my phone's always dying.
Hmm.
Maybe that's really about a deeper need for stability, predictability, feeling like things are reliable.
Or, no one liked my post.
Yeah. That could easily mask a profound longing to be seen, to be affirmed, to feel like you matter in the social sphere. Or maybe my barista messed up my drink isn't about the coffee at all, but about feeling a loss of control, a tiny disruption in a routine that feels essential.
Even too many streaming options.
Often points to decision fatigue,
Right.
right? Not just entitlement. The core insight here is that these small complaints are rarely just about the thing itself. They're like our emotional canary in the coal mine. They signal unmet needs bubbling up. Especially in societies where basic material needs are mostly met for many people, the battleground shifts. It shifts to things like meaning, belonging, attention, validation. Those become the scarce resources we fight over, consciously or not.
And there's a paradox here too, right? That abundance itself can create fragility. Like having more options, more resources, more freedom. It sounds great, but it can actually stir up anxiety.
It really can. Too many choices can be paralyzing. That's decision fatigue again. Abundance can sometimes isolate us if you don't need people for basic survival. You might forget how crucial connection is. And when you're used to a certain level of comfort or efficiency, even small bumps in the road, bad service, slow internet can feel disproportionately jarring. It's not necessarily about being spoiled, but that comfort doesn't make you immune to suffering. Sometimes it makes you more sensitive to slights that wouldn't even register if you were just trying to survive.
Hmm. And these problems often pop up because we lack support, like the village is gone.
That's a big part of it, yeah. In really individualistic societies, many people don't have that built-in village structure for venting, or close family nearby for grounding, or community rituals to help process emotions. So where do they turn? Often online. They complain to strangers or to their broad social network. And in that context, instead of being seen as just a person having a hard moment, they risk becoming a symbol of dysfunction or entitlement or whatever judgment gets thrown their way.
So the first world problem might feel minor.
But the isolation that can be driving it or that surrounds it, that's definitely not minor.
And they also seem to reflect the pressures of modern life, right? This culture of hyper efficiency, like the plain Wi-Fi is down, or my grocery delivery is late, or this stupid smart home thing isn't working.
Exactly. These complaints often happen in the gaps between our high expectations of seamlessness and the reality that our complex systems,
Mm.
well, they fail sometimes. They're these little reminders that our convenient world isn't invincible. And when we rely on these systems, offload our mental energy onto them, their failure can feel really destabilizing. It's almost like a form of micro-grief, maybe. A subtle mourning for the illusion that life should be perfectly smooth.
That's fascinating. Micro grief.
And another layer our research uncovered. These small problems are often safer things to focus on than bigger, scarier emotions.
See, for proxies.
Yeah. People might fixate on a minor inconvenience because deep down they don't feel they have permission to feel the deeper pain. Or maybe they don't even know how to name the real issue, the loneliness, the burnout, the existential dread. Or they feel ashamed of the real problem.
So the bad haircut becomes the stand-in for feeling worthless.
Right. Or the rude email becomes the lightning rod for months of pent-up burnout. The late Uber triggers a wave of anxiety about lack of control in life. They're like emotional decoys, drawing fire away from the really vulnerable truths.
And the funny thing is, people often know this sounds trivial, right? They even say first world problem out loud.
They do. There's often this self-awareness. People preface their complaints, I know this sounds silly, or they make the first world problem joke themselves. It's like an apology and a shield all at once.
But just being aware of it doesn't make the feeling disappear.
Not at all. Awareness doesn't dissolve the emotion. And sometimes that added layer of shame, feeling embarrassed about having a dumb problem, can actually make people less likely to explore what's really going on underneath. It just reinforces the cycle of silence.
So instead of just rolling our eyes or dismissing these things, what's a better way to look at them?
We could try reframing them, see them not just as complaints, but as potential triggers for empathy, or at least curiosity, rather than instant judgment. Maybe view them as little portals into understanding modern alienation, or as markers of where our values might be misaligned, or signals that material abundance doesn't guarantee emotional safety or well-being.
So ask different questions.
Exactly. Instead of why are they complaining about that,
Yeah.
maybe ask, okay, what does this frustration really mean to this person right now? Or what deeper pain or unmet need might be masked or displaced here?
And you mentioned the irony of this in a globalized world. The lines are blurring.
Yeah, the whole first world versus third world binary, it's getting pretty outdated when it comes to problems. You have people in developing nations dealing with tech frustrations and online pressures alongside infrastructure issues. And you have people in wealthy nations facing serious precarity, housing insecurity, medical debt, chronic stress. Suffering doesn't neatly follow geopolitical borders anymore. But our judgments often still do. We still apply that hierarchy.
Okay, this is complex. So how do we navigate all this with more grace, more understanding, both for ourselves and others?
I think a key reframing principle is this. It's not really about how objectively big the problem is. It's about how real it feels to the person experiencing it. And maybe this follows. All real emotions deserve real attention. That doesn't mean every problem needs a 5-alarm fire response or even a solution. But the feeling itself deserves acknowledgement.
That's a really important distinction. Okay, so let's say you are the one feeling burdened by a first world problem. What can you do? First, maybe validate the feeling, but without making it bigger than it is. Tell yourself something like, okay, this is frustrating. It matters to me right now. I know it's not the end of the world, but it's still messed with my sense of control or my routine.
Right. That helps diffuse the shame without, turning a molehill into Mount Everest.
Second, maybe ask, what's the real wound here? Use the complaint like a clue. So instead of just fuming about the slow Wi-Fi, ask, okay, why does this disruption feel so unsettling to me right now? Or am I actually feeling ignored, anxious, overstimulated? That builds self-awareness.
That's powerful. And third,
Maybe gently zoom out with compassion, get some perspective, not to shame yourself, but just to ground yourself. Like, okay, in the grand scheme, this isn't urgent, but I'm still allowed to care about it for a minute.
that sounds like a healthy balance. And what about when you're sharing your problem with someone else? How can you do that constructively?
Well, one strategy is to use I statements and focus on the emotional impact, not just the logistical complaint. So instead of just saying, my Uber driver took forever, I was losing my mind, maybe try something like, ugh, I felt so powerless and anxious waiting for that Uber because I really hate being late. It kind of triggered something deeper than just annoyance.
Ah, so you invite empathy by sharing how it actually felt.
Exactly. Another tip, maybe own the potential perception up front, then gently redirect it. Acknowledge the context. You could say, look, I know this probably sounds like a classic first world problem, but honestly, I think it just touched a nerve I didn't realize was so sensitive.
That helps diffuse defensiveness in the listener.
Yeah, it shows you're self-aware. And third, really think about matching the space to the problem. You probably wouldn't launch into a rant about your phone acting up in the middle of, say, a grief support group meeting.
Right. Context matters. Hugely. But complaining about it to a close friend while you're just hanging out? Totally fine. The setting really shapes how your problem lands and how it's heard.
Okay, and the flip side. What if you're the one listening to someone else's first world problem? This feels like where the real empathy work happens. First, try to lead with emotional validation, right? Not logistical judgment. So instead of immediately thinking, seriously, that's what you're upset about, maybe try saying something like, wow, that sounds genuinely frustrating. Do you want to unpack why it hit you so hard?
That opens the door. Because often, like we said, the complaint is just the tip of the iceberg.
It's also helpful, maybe, to gently help them zoom out if they seem stuck, really spiraling over something small. You could ask questions like, do you think maybe something else might be underneath this frustration? Or what could help you feel a bit more grounded right now?
The goal isn't to dismiss their feeling, but to help them shift perspective a bit.
And crucially, know when to set your own boundaries. Empathy doesn't mean endless listening if someone is just obsessing in a way that feels draining or unproductive.
Right. You can say something kind but firm like, hey, I really care about you and I want to support you, but I'm wondering if dwelling on this specific thing is actually helping right now. Maybe we could talk about what's deeper, or maybe just shift focus for a bit.
So empathy doesn't mean letting someone drown in their own puddle, as one source put it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the guiding principle through all this, whether it's your problem or someone else's, could be validate the emotion first. Then examine the trigger, what actually set it off. Reflect on the underlying need, what's really being expressed here, and then choose your response.
Validate, examine, reflect, choose. That framework seems really helpful. It helps avoid shame, keeps us self-aware, helps communication, and supports others without judging or coddling them too much.
Precisely.
Okay, but let's tackle some pushback here. We've seen critiques, like couldn't validating these first world problems just end up reinforcing entitlement, making people more fragile?
That's a fair concern, and some critics definitely argue that. They worry that if we overvalidate every minor inconvenience, treat a slightly wrong coffee order with the same emotional weight as, say, real grief, we might actually encourage emotional fragility or self-absorption. We could dilute resilience. This connects to broader critiques of what some call therapy speak culture, where maybe normal life friction gets overanalyzed or pathologized.
It's a tricky balance, but our deep dive suggests the answer isn't necessarily to invalidate the small stuff altogether. It's more about contextualizing it, right? Helping people use those small frustrations as moments for reflection, maybe growth, rather than just getting stuck fixating on them. So validation isn't the same as indulgence. It's maybe the starting point for understanding something deeper.
Well put. Validation is a starting point.
What about the risk of performance? The oversharing culture online, does validating complaints feed into that?
It's definitely a risk in online spaces. You absolutely see complaints that feel performative. There's this term vulnerability inflation where minor feelings get dramatized for clicks or likes, or complaintfluencing, where sharing everyday distress becomes part of someone's online brand.
And that can feel cheap, like it diminishes real suffering, and
Yeah.
maybe trains us to expect constant low-stakes drama.
It can, yeah. It can lead to cynicism. The online incentive structure really can distort authentic expression. But again, maybe the deeper issue isn't that people are expressing small problems, but why the algorithms and culture only seem to reward certain, often dramatic ways of doing it.
So the answer isn't just shutting it down, but maybe fostering more emotional literacy, better discernment, both in sharing and receiving.
Exactly. More literacy, not more repression.
Okay, but the big one. Aren't first world problems still fundamentally privileged? That critique feels hard to ignore.
It is hard to ignore, and it's valid. For someone genuinely worried about paying rent or finding their next meal, hearing someone agonize over, I don't know, Zoom fatigue or a delayed Amazon package, it can feel incredibly jarring, even offensive. There's often this unspoken or sometimes spoken reaction. Seriously, that's your biggest problem right now. And that feeling absolutely shapes how these complaints are perceived and often tuned out.
Yeah. So while we need to acknowledge that relative privilege, how do we do that without just shutting down the conversation? Our insights suggest we can name the privilege without necessarily moralizing the pain itself. Pain that happens within a context of privilege is still real pain. It just might not be the kind that requires urgent systemic intervention.
Right. The question isn't just, is this problem small? But maybe, is the person using this feeling, however small the trigger, to grow, to understand themselves better? Or are they using it to deflect from something more significant?
Which links to another critique. Do people sometimes use these small problems to avoid dealing with the bigger, harder stuff?
That's a very real possibility, yes. Some people absolutely fixate on minor issues as a form of displacement. It's easier to complain endlessly about, say, a messy house than to confront underlying relationship problems. Or easier to freak out about a tech glitch than to face feelings of professional inadequacy or burnout.
So if we just validate the surface complaint without looking deeper, we might accidentally enable that avoidance.
Potentially, yes. And that's why, as you said earlier, empathy needs to be curious, not just comforting. It's not just about nodding along. It's about gently asking those probing questions. I wonder if this might be tapping into something else for you too, or why do you think this particular thing hit you so hard today?
Empathy as a flashlight, not just a sponge. Illuminating rather than just absorbing.
I like that. A flashlight, not a sponge.
Okay, one more layer of critique. What about the self-awareness itself becoming performative? People saying, I know this is a first world problem, but it feels hollow.
Yeah, you definitely see that sometimes. The disclaimer, I know this is privileged, but can sometimes feel like a humble brag or a way to preempt criticism while still centering their minor issue.
Yeah.
Like, I know this is such a first world problem, but the organic grocery delivery substituted the wrong kind of kale. You can create this kind of pseudo-accountability.
So how do we tell the difference between genuine self-awareness and just performing it?
It often comes down to tone, sincerity, and intention, which are hard to gauge, especially online. But real self-awareness usually feels less like a disclaimer and more like genuine context setting, maybe even vulnerability. Instead of using, I know this is privileged, as just a shield. Someone might say something like, hey, I want to talk about something that feels kind of minor, but it actually affected me quite a bit today. Are you in a space to hear about something like that? That feels more like respect, like genuine awareness of the listener and the context, rather than just performance.
That makes sense. Okay, shifting gears slightly, a really deep critique from our sources looks at the systemic roots. Why are we perhaps so fragile in the first place, even in societies with relative abundance?
Right. This critique goes beyond individual complaints and asks, why do so many people, even with material comfort, seem to feel so unwell, so anxious, so easily overwhelmed by things that seem objectively minor? Is it a symptom of being disconnected from nature, from strong community bonds? Is it the relentless pressure of capitalism to optimize every single moment, making any inefficiency feel like a crisis? Is it maybe too much comfort and not enough genuine resilience-building challenge? Or is it the profound loneliness that can pervade our increasingly digital lives?
And the answer seems to be
Yes,
all of the above.
probably a mix of all of those, yeah. And that's exactly why these seemingly small first-world problems can be so emotionally revealing. They aren't just about the bad latte foam or the slow streaming. They're like little distress signals from a society that might be materially full, but in many ways seems emotionally malnourished.
Wow, okay. It's clear that talking about this stuff with nuance is hard, both online and face-to-face.
Really is. Online, everything conspires against nuance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Comment sections reward speed and snark, not thoughtful depth. Algorithms boost outrage. There's context collapse. You post something, you have no idea who's reading it or how they'll take it.
Yeah.
An emotional tone, so easily misread in text. Sarcasm lands flat. Vulnerability looks like attention-seeking.
And even in person, it's not easy.
Not at all. Most of us were never really taught how to listen deeply without jumping in to fix it or share our own story. It's hard to balance being empathetic with being honest in the moment. And our conversations are often rushed. We're distracted. Maybe we're stressed ourselves. It's just easier, quicker to offer a simple, that sucks, or even a dismissive, just get over it, than to engage with curiosity and ask those deeper questions.
So despite all those challenges, how can we try to move towards more nuance? What are some practical ways?
Well, one key thing is to try and ask more than you assume. Whether you're commenting online or talking to a friend, instead of jumping to conclusions, maybe ask something like, can you tell me a bit more about what made this feel so frustrating for you? Or even, are you looking for support right now? Or mostly just someone to listen? That creates space, doesn't it? Without immediate judgment.
Okay, ask more, assume less. What else?
Pause before reacting. Just take a beat. Ask yourself, okay, am I reacting to what they actually said, or am I reacting to how their complaint made me feel? Is my judgment about them? Or is it triggering something in me, envy, guilt, irritation? That tiny pause can make a huge difference.
Pause and check yourself. Good one.
Use meta-communication. Basically, name the complexity or the potential awkwardness up front. Saying something like, okay, this might sound like a small thing, but it actually hit me harder than I expected today. That signals you're aware of the potential perception, aware of the limitations of maybe texting about it, and that builds trust.
Acknowledge the weirdness.
Yeah. And finally, try to lead with soft curiosity. Instead of that sharp, judgmental question like, why are you even upset about that? Try a gentler approach. That's interesting. What part of that situation upset you the most? Curiosity keeps people open and exploring. Judgment almost always just shuts them down.
Lead with soft curiosity. I like that. Okay, so let's try and wrap up this deep dive. What's the big picture here? First world problems, they're not fake. They're real emotional signals shaped by our modern lives, by privilege, sure, but also by very real, often unmet psychological needs. But our current culture, with its constant comparison, its demand for speed, its quick judgments, especially online, makes it incredibly difficult to talk about these things or hear about them with the nuance and empathy they probably deserve.
Absolutely.
So instead of just dismissing them outright or maybe overindulging them, we need a more thoughtful path. An approach that validates the actual emotion because the feeling is real, but without necessarily inflating the drama around the trigger.
Right. An approach that stays curious about what might be underneath that surface frustration.
That encourages clear communication, considering the context. That responds to others with that open, soft curiosity we talked about. And that ultimately fosters emotional honesty, regardless of someone's perceived level of privilege.
Because fundamentally, pain doesn't need to be ranked to be real. And navigating it well in ourselves and others requires both compassion and discernment. It's not always easy, but it's necessary.
Compassion and discernment, that feels like the key balance.
And maybe here's a final thought, something provocative for you to chew on after this. Maybe we don't really have a space problem when it comes to discussing these things. Maybe we have a patience problem. Nuance takes time. It takes building trust. It takes mental and emotional effort. And those things feel like increasingly rare currencies in our fast-paced world, especially online.
Patience.
That's interesting. In a world that seems determined to flatten emotional complexity into easy-to-digest sound bites or viral outrage, perhaps the most radical act we can practice is simply to stay curious. Curious long enough, patient enough for the deeper truth to actually emerge.
Stay curious long enough for the truth to emerge. That's a powerful place to end. We really invite you, our listeners, to carry that curiosity forward into your own experiences, into your interactions online and offline. Keep diving deep into what truly matters.